Welcome everybody to another CKCA national discussion. This one is on a really important and relevant topic that I think resonates with many of you: succession planning, a view from the other side. We've been doing some work with MNP and through those conversations discovered that they have significant expertise in this area. So we were really pleased to be able to connect with them and invite them to come and present to you today. I think you're going to get some really great information. Just a few quick housekeeping notes. If we have any technical issues, fingers crossed, we will reschedule this. Remember to unmute if you want to speak. And we are recording the session. It will be made available to you after the event. As well, we'll be sharing the slide deck. And we will, I'll let the presenters decide how they want to do the Q&A, but we can definitely do Q&A at the end. And a reminder, use the chat box to put your questions in as you think of them. And we'll save them and then we'll present those questions when the timing is good. So my name is Sandra Wood. I'm the Executive Director of the CKCA. And these are my coordinates. So please reach out to me at any time. As members, you should be hearing from us on a weekly basis through our e-blasts. If you are not hearing from us, that's a red flag because we send out weekly information to you. So it probably means we're hitting your spam or firewall or something like that. But please get in touch with me to make sure that we're hearing from, or that you're hearing from us and I'm hearing from you. So our agenda today is, I'll give you a quick welcome to the CKCA. We'll do some introductions. We're going to hear from our sponsor, Bloom, who's very kindly supporting this webinar. And we're very grateful for those sponsorship dollars. Those go towards lots of the work that we are doing for this within the CKCA for you. And then you're going to hear from our two presenters, Lynn and Eben. Just briefly, this is our board of directors for 2023, 2024. You probably recognize a number of the faces, and as a few faces on the board who are on this call today. These are members within the community. They are manufacturers and suppliers. You're welcome to reach out to any of them at any time. If you don't have their coordinates, you can contact me and I'd be more than happy to share them with you. CKCA is involved in a lot of different things throughout the year. Running webinars is one of them. We are also doing face-to-face events. And actually this fall, we have our national forum coming up in Moncton, New Brunswick, September 28th to the 30th. As well, we have several trade shows that we will be participating in October and November. Please be sure to mute your mic there. Thank you. So I just wanted to put this out to you. I actually saw this, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, which through CKCA membership you're members of, has pushed out a couple of interesting pieces of statistics that I thought would be a good primer to start for today. So the first one is only 9% of business owners have a formalized documented succession plan, which I was really surprised to hear. And approximately 40% do say they have some sort of informal plans, but that still leaves just over half with no plans at all. So hopefully after today's webinar, we'll give you some information that if you don't have a plan, you'll want to start working on building one. And then the other piece that I think is quite significant is they estimate over $2 trillion in business assets are at stake as a majority of small business owners plan to exit their business over the next decade. So that is a significant volume that is moving. So on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Tony Henry from Bloom, who's our sponsor today, and he's going to tell you a little bit about Bloom, and he's going to introduce our presenters. Over to you, Tony.
Thanks very much, Sandra. Glad to be here once again. Bloom's an ongoing sponsor to the CKCA, and we will continue to do so. So it was fitting for us to sponsor this event. You know, Bloom is a family-run business, and we've had a number of succession plans in place, and they will continue. So, you know, with Bloom, you know, our founder, Julius, over 70 years ago, founded the company. And about 30 years ago, his son, Gerhard, took the company over and became managing director of Bloom, the Bloom organization. And just recently, it's been handed over to Philip Bloom, Gerhardt's son. So we're on to the third generation of managing directors within the Bloom family. And Philip, I think he was well prepared. He was well educated, and he actually worked abroad for about 12 years at different companies and organizations before he came into work permanently within the Bloom organization. And, in his tenure there, he managed a number of different regions, projects, tasks, and departments, a number of people. And he was instrumental in, really starting the Asian market for us and building that. So he was well seasoned, and he took over in 2019. And who knew then what was going to happen next but COVID? And, I'm glad Philip Bloom was prepared for those, those unknowns that can happen. So, everything's great when things are running smooth, but Philip, I think he was well prepared and, still dealing with the lingering effects of COVID. But so we take a lot of responsibility and pride and time with succession planning, and it's even done within the subsidiaries. And it's anywhere between 1 to 5 years, depending on the responsibility of the person or the department. And in that time frame, if it's somebody that's retiring in 1 to 2 years, then we put a little bit of an organizational development process in place. Where we look at what are the tasks at hand, what are the skills needed, can one person do this job or task in the future, or does it need to be broken out, and who do you have in place, and who do you groom? So those are some of the things that we do with succession planning. So I'm looking very forward to hearing how Lynn and Eben conduct their seminar. I look forward to some of their advice. And so without further ado, I present them, and they are from the company of MNP. Lynn works out of the Edmonton office. Eben works out of the Abbotsford office. They've worked with many family businesses over the years that are faced with tough decisions around family ownership, succession, retirement plans, as well as bringing employees into ownership or their clients. They work together on files frequently and are part of a team of specialists across the country to serve MNP's clients with succession and transition advice. So I let the floor go to Lynn and Eben. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony and Sharon. Tony, what a great way to start this. So interesting to hear your Bloom story of succession. It sounds like it's been really embedded into the culture of the company, and sure. It gives a lot of comfort to clients and suppliers and people alike, anybody who deals with Bloom, in knowing that the company is taken care of for the long term, right? So
I should have let you speak for me. Thank you.
So, wow, it's a pleasure to be here. Eben and I have had the pleasure of working with a few companies in your industry. We work with a lot of families, as was mentioned by Tony, and our favorite groups are little groups like this, where we get to kind of know people and hear your stories and share a few ideas. So we want to share as one of our stories, one of our clients' stories, and then give you a little bit of information around how what a good approach to succession planning might be, and also some really good options that you may or may not have considered and how they might play in your planning. So we're going to start out with a story. Stories are always great. This happens to be a true one, which is even better. And we also want to encourage you as we go, and I forgot to mention this, but please do, put your questions into the chat. We'll be monitoring them as we go, and we'll try to pick up and talk about them as we go. We also have a little bit of time at the end to, to address some of those questions. So after we share Ollie's story with you, we're going to talk a little bit about how you might get started and some of the considerations and kind of interesting maybe options that you haven't thought of, and some that might be very applicable in under today's circumstances. And as Tony said, things have changed a lot in the last 3 years, and particularly in your industry. Maybe even, why don't we start just there?
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Lynn. So first of all, Lynn gave me a hard time yesterday. I used the word retirement when we were finalizing the slides, and she said we're not allowed to use the word retirement. So it's an important point to make. Let's just get the word retirement as the typical definition of succession. Let's just get that off the table. Succession is such a broad scope of change with people, what they do, how they're organized, who does what, and how that unfolds over time. So we've seen far more discussions about looking for alternative options than just, I'm going to build up a company, have a lot of value, and then I'm going to sell the company, right? Or it's automatically going to the children. So that's part of our presentation today, is to expose you to some more of the options, which is becoming far more prominent in all the work we do. So we don't have to tell you this, but the playing field for your industry, like just about every other industry, there's bad news everywhere and concern everywhere. The playing field is far more complex. Many companies are stuck with, we have to invest, in some cases, millions of dollars into technology, and it needs to tie together. We have to become far more automated, but we don't know if we're going to keep the company, and we don't know if we can actually afford it. Is it a 5 and a 10-year investment? Will I still own the company after all of that? There are all kinds of other issues that's coming out in the industries. You see some of them on the slide there. The biggest one that we are called on most, and I'm spending more than, probably after this, my whole day just dealing with employee retention in companies. And that's where Lynn and myself have worked together quite a bit. Huge industry consolidation, those with the big checkbooks, private equity, etc., looking for more companies to buy in. They've got money to put somewhere, to invest somewhere, and they're looking at your industry as one of the key industries in which they can do it. So the playing field has definitely become more complex. Succession was complex before. Well, it's becoming a little bit more complex if you look around at the playing field right now.
So we thought we'd start out with the story about a client that we're currently working with. And, they're dealing with all of those factors that Eben just mentioned. And one of their key issues is, they've traditionally had one way of dealing with succession planning. And now with all of those factors having changed in their world, they're kind of going and looking at this and going, is this the right way for us to go? So let us tell you a little bit about them. So they're a medium-sized family-owned cabinet manufacturing business in central Canada. The business was started by the grandfather and is now on the 3rd generation. Traditionally, the business has passed from grandfather to eldest son, and it's currently owned by the 2 grandsons of the original founder. And when I say owned, they are the owner-operators. There are other shareholders, but they're in non-active shareholders. Those shareholders, operators, are in their early to mid-50s. The eldest son, so generation 4 now, has recently completed a diploma at in business, and he's working in the finance area And by virtue of his last name, he believes that, he should have as much authority as his father and his grandfather and his great-grandfather, I guess. And it is causing a lot of problems in the business, with staffing, with conflicts between the generations, that kind of thing. And so, that's kind of the situation that is currently in the business. And then there are also 3 additional shareholders who are not active in the business, but are still hold votes and expect regular distributions. I should mention that as well. One of the current operating, the gentleman who is one of the 2 brothers, has recently received, I guess, a red flag from his doctor telling him that he really does need to slow down. The stress is too much for him, and he needs to take care of himself and make sure that he's dealing with some of these issues so that he can spend more time away from the business. He's currently putting in many, many hours, way too many hours, dealing with a lot of issues relating to succession, relating to the business itself, relating to a lot of the factors that Eben mentioned previously. And so when they came to us, they said, we've been doing this the same way for a long time, and frankly, it's worked. So here's what we've been doing. We've been kind of through the generations, we've been sort of selecting our eldest son, and we have sort of groomed that person from an early age. They've been working on the shop floor from being teenagers. They've learned the business from the ground up. And eventually we do this thing called an estate freeze. We freeze the value of the company, and we find a way for the family members to come in at nominal cost. Many of you will know this plan. It's a very common plan within family businesses. There's a redemption plan, so the shares are moved from over time from the current shareholders to the new shareholders, and eventually the incoming generation becomes the majority shareholders. The older generation is paid from the profits and the earnings of the business, and everybody's continues on. And so that's the way that it's been going on for many generations now. But with the changes that have taken place in the industry, with their family situation different now, they're kind of wondering, is that the best way? And the traditional way was kind of the in the box thinking. It was like, this is the way that we've always done it. We thought that the term box might resonate with you, hence we used it was Eben's idea. It seemed like a good idea when we talked about it. It's, what I mean. So we're thinking now sort of beyond the box. And some of the questions that have come up in those preliminary discussions with our client have been, are the family members the right people to lead the business? We've always kind of found someone, but this new son isn't necessarily checking as many of the boxes as we'd hoped that he would at this point. And maybe there's other candidates out there that could lead the business. And and alongside that, does the leader need to be an owner? I guess that's another question. Does the approach make sense financially for the current generations? They're worried about, if this is going to meet their not their retirement requirements, but their retirements for the next stage of their life. we're not using the word retirement even. So they're concerned about the future of their personal finances. They're wondering, can the family continue to own a portion of the business? But maybe there's employees in the business that could run it and lead it in a way that, you know, family members wouldn't. And maybe that could be better. And they've also actually been considering sale. And that's a difficult conversation for them to have because this is third generation, right? Potentially fourth generation. However, if there's a buyer out there, would they be ready? Those are some of the questions too. If they are approached by a potential consolidator, would they be ready? And how would they know if they were ready? And is that even an option for them? So all of those questions have been on the docket in the preliminary conversations. And then, you know, one of the final one that came up was, well, you know, there's other businesses out there smaller than ours that are related, that are looking, they're going through their own succession planning. Maybe we could acquire them and create an even bigger business and attract some investors and really blow this thing up, like make it very substantial. And so, you know, sometimes the traditional approach needs to be turned on its side and shaken up a little bit to really get the best outcome for the family and the business. And so, Eben.
So then if you can just transition to the what do you really want part as well. So if you look at this slide, this is probably one of the most difficult areas to deal with. When we say family business, experience has taught us that family does not just mean those who are shareholders now, those who all share the same last name. Family starts to bring the in-laws in as well. Family, I have a number of files on the go now where the shareholders consider key people that have worked in the company, and some of them say they helped us start the company 20, 25, 30 years ago, where some of those individuals started, in one case when he was 12, I think it was illegal even then, but let's say 16, they've been working in the company and they said, well, you know what, we want to treat them like their family as well. So what does that mean? So the whole process that we take companies through and families through, actually, if you look at the right-hand column and says, what do you really want? These are difficult things because your whole life in most succession, it has been drive results, drive growth, drive profit, make the investments, get the new customers, weather the financial storms, weather the cyclical storms that happens in the ebbs and flows in 2007, 2008, 2002, and 2001. You know, all those things that happen expand into new markets. And that has been the focus. And now all of a sudden we show up and we say, do you want to leave a legacy? What is the level of financial security that you want? Do you want to take care of your family and your employees, even those employees that you treat as family? Do you want to do that long term? How important is it? Maybe it's ego, maybe it's vanity, maybe it is just pride in the family to say, do you want your family name to be on the business card, especially when a business name represents the family who currently owns it, their last name, right? And what are your estate goals and obligations? A consistent message that we hear right now from companies is, I don't want to retire, I don't want to sell, but I really do want to just be able to take a step back. I want to open up opportunity for more people. If you've got one parent, you've got 3 children coming into the business, you may need 2-3 times more of the economic opportunity and just the ability to carry the salaries and wages and income expectations of everybody. That leads to questions right there. So if we can start with that, and then we can work backwards and say, okay, what do you think is your business worth today? If your business is worth a whole bunch of money today, but you are never selling it, how do you extract the value that is in there out so that you can actually retire from it. I would say more than 90% of the businesses that we work with, the shareholders are quite clear on the fact that the equity that they have is all locked up inside the business. They've got some RSPs, etc. Very few have built up substantial funds outside because they've always thought, you know what, I can sell my business one day. When I do that, then I'll have my retirement funding. But what, as Lynn said, what if it is a health issue that forces you to expedite, to accelerate all of that? And it is the worst possible time in the economy with where it is in order to do that. Your profitability, for good reasons, maybe your profitability has just not been there. But this is the part where we then set the stage and we go through all of these different things. And I mean, sometimes it is difficult family discussions that we need to have. I was with a family, I've been coaching them on a monthly basis for over a year now, and we were talking estate planning yesterday. Well, immediately you've got issues like entitlement coming up, right? One file I worked on, 25 and a 27-year-old children of, well, they would be generation 3. Through their mom's estate, she passed on quite early. They are now receiving between $1 and $2 million of dividends each per year at 25 and 27. That is a really, really nice situation to be in, but it has got implications on them because the 25-year-old boldly announced to everybody that I'm retiring right now. At 25, I'm retiring. And now there's all kinds of other issues that stem from that. So now it's about who controls the purse, etc. A lot of things to talk about. So this process, that is why we take you through the process. So if you can go to the next slide, Ellen. So let's look at options beyond just selling. Do you want to sell to a third party? Somebody from the outside want to come in and purchase the company. Just so you know, we're finding in more and more, and it's not just the really small communities, we finding people that say, find me a way that I can keep my business and the people inside, all my employees in this community, because this is a big employer within the community, and we really want the economic activity. We want it to stay here. If somebody big comes and buys, it is just going to disappear. They're going to take it elsewhere. So help us find a way that we are selling the business, but we are not doing it to somebody that will just take the business elsewhere. Lynn, you can just go through. Thank you. Do you want to sell a part of the business to a third party? Do you think it is worthwhile to bring an outside investor in, a strategic investor maybe, that can bring certain advice? Maybe they take a 20 or 30% stake in the business. Maybe they join the board of directors if you have one, or maybe you get one. And then they are able to bring some strategic advice to you because you may not have that level or that specific application of advice. Do you want to transition to the broader family? So it's not just the people working in the business, but it's also the family as a whole, and to say our whole family, as you define it, will be owning this business and everything around it. Do you want to sell to your employees? Do you want to sell to your family and employees, especially when you're bringing family members through and there are key employees that you need to stay in the business? Do you want to retain ownership of the entire business and have the business fully operated by professionals? So in other words, you remain 100% shareholder, but you're getting professionals, seasoned people to run the business who know the industry, who know the company inside out, and the family just becomes an inactive shareholder, right? Do you want to retain partial ownership and have the business fully operated by leaders and managers with an ownership stake? So in other words, you bring them into whatever degree it would be, but those working in the business who are not family members, they become shareholders with the family shareholders. And then the last one is, do you want to retain ownership and have the business operated by an interim CEO? This is quite common in succession situations, especially when succession, the timeline is forced on people and they have to accelerate it. So maybe you bring somebody in, and I'm going to use an age number here, Maybe this person at 50, 55-year-old knows the industry inside and out, has got no aspirations to become the controlling shareholder of the company and say, you know what, can you come in and actually help prepare the next generation while you work here as the CEO? And this person may have a 2, 3, or 5-year window in which they do that. But a key part of their mandate is to prepare the next generation.
And so I guess maybe even this is probably the key message of this entire presentation. And you know, as you've heard, our focus is on options and being aware of all of the options and considering seriously that the various different options with respect to alignment to your personal objectives. And so the one thing that's going to open up your options is early intentionality. So being intentional about making decisions and preparing your business and your family for succession. And so, you know, when we work with families or founders who are, you know, 2 years away from wanting to retire, 1 year away, 4 years away, the number of options that are available to them are innumerably smaller than when we start working with them 10 years out. And so, you know, I think that Tony mentioned this earlier in his presentation and his introduction as well, you know, that succession planning is kind of ongoing. And so, you know, we all know these statistics around 70% of business owners don't have a succession plan in place. I mean, we hear this pretty much daily. And yet 48% of family businesses plan on plan on passing along ownership to the next generation. What's missing is the plan for how that's going to happen. And even within that option, as you've seen, there's multiple ways of doing that. It can be full transition of ownership, it can be partial, it can involve employees, it can involve, you know, non-active shareholders. Like there's even within that small definition of passing along the ownership of the business to the next generation, there's multiple hybrids even within that. And so the key really is making sure that the business, you know, if that's the intention of, you know, to pass the business from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next, having that intentionality and having thought through the ways that can work and the actual steps that it will take to get there is really critical. Because you've heard this stat too. Less than 60% of businesses make it to generation number 2. Sounds like your industry is exceptional in this area. I mean, you have lots of family businesses, but really 1 in 10 makes it to generation 3. So when Eben and I talk, you know, working with a generation 3 or a generation 4 business, they're kind of the rare ones. There's very few out there. But we see over and over again that those businesses that do make it have thought through the steps that they need to take, you know, over a period of time to get there. And, you know, I think that in her introduction, Sandra mentioned that she mentioned that 40% of businesses, a lot of, I can't remember the statistics exactly, but a lot of businesses say that they have a succession plan, but it isn't written. You'll remember that. And so, you know, that is a thought and maybe a bit of a plan, but the problem is that what if some things go wrong with that plan that doesn't have, isn't written and doesn't have a plan B? when we work with clients, we always talk about, what if this doesn't work? What's your plan B? What can happen next? Let's get ready for not only plan A, but let's also get ready for if plan A doesn't work out and if plan B doesn't work out. So we're not starting all over again. We're just continuing down the road, because what if the plan is to sell the business to a third party, but the price isn't right? What if there aren't enough buyers? And those two really go together. What if an offer comes along and you're not done being a business owner? As Eben said, one of the common things that we're hearing now is business owners aren't really interested in retiring, but they are interested in having a different way of having their companies be run, and maybe a different ownership structure so that they can do other things besides being a business owner, or in addition to being a business owner. And what if the right people aren't in place and there's a health issue such as Ollie's in Ollie's family? So, we want to stress this importance of intentionality and also thinking things through in a way that there are backup plans along the way. Back to you, Eben.
So one of the biggest problems we have is people would say, do you have a will? Yes. So it's not a joke, it's true stories when people would say, well, we do have a will, but honey, do you remember we did that will when our first child was born? And I say, how old is that child now? 55. That's when they last did their will. There are stories out there, and yesterday I spent time with this family. 74-year-old father is proud to say that he is now in year 2, maybe he'll give some leniency year 3 of his 10-year succession plan. He's 74, people. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I asked him, is there anything you like doing outside the company? And he looks at me and says, no, I love doing this. Some of you may be in that position. And sometimes it's really hard for that person to take a step back. A key message around intentionality. The earlier you have the conversation, and I just want to take a pause in our presentation and say, when we give you all these options, you do not have to plan and have the discussion and immediately roll into the execution of the plans. You do not have to immediately implement. So please take that pressure off you, because it is not the same. Just because you do certain planning, have certain discussions, doesn't mean it's a continuous process and it's like a snowball that is just going to keep on running and it is just going to go bigger and you cannot stop the train. In some cases, people feel it's like a freight train and they lose control. No, what we are suggesting to you is the earlier you talk, the earlier you go through the different permutations, the earlier you do all of that and start to find out what works for me, what does not work for me, what will I like, what will I not like. If I go to anybody now and say, your succession plan means that 3 years from now, you're not in the company anymore, as CEO, president, as the biggest hero in the company because you've built it and you run the whole show, you're not allowed to do that anymore. That you may just say, sorry, no, I don't want to do succession then. Well, it's just because it speaks to the role only. So the earlier you start, the more options you have on the table. I mean, that's logic, but also you're able to do more, such as you can build the value of the company up. The whole time frame by which you make some of the big financial decisions, right? I mentioned earlier, automation is becoming a multi-million-dollar decision in a heartbeat, because once you take this piece of the whole line, and then you have to change the next piece and the next piece, and all of a sudden it becomes a really big process. Well, try and do all of that with succession and to say, I also want to take some money out of the company for my own retirement as long as I have that secure, right? Then I don't mind staying on as a shareholder. So there are so many options if you start early. Europe has got a far more advanced model for obviously just history as well. Germany specifically, England, I know of companies where they've been in families for far longer with evolved models, but it's also because they have, as a culture maybe, they've got more of a bent to let's keep this long-term within the families. So start your planning early. If you leave it late, your options narrow down, and then, for example, a sale may be the only option that is still left on the table. Yesterday's meeting, what I did with them, I actually ran them through and said, I'll call the individual Peter. Peter passed away. What are the key next steps? What do we have to do inside the business, inside the estate? What happens with life insurance? What happens with who makes the decisions? Who becomes the directors of the company, etc. And we actually walk all of that through with them from a business and a family and the people inside point of view. You can go to the next slide there, Ben. So be intentional. Find out what you want. The opposite of that is find out what you do not want. Start to take options off, but leave as many on as you're comfortable with. What do you actually need? What do you need from the company for you as an individual to where you spend your time? What do you need from the company financially? When do you need it? In what way do you need it? Are you willing to carry security on your portfolio, even if you are 80 years old? Yes or no? So when do you want it? What are all the options? What are the options that you know for a fact will not work? And so this is the part where you then say, okay, but who are the people that I need to have in place? Think employee retention right now. We get called by companies saying, if I lose that person or that person, I'm totally hooked. I'm in deep trouble. How can I keep them, right? So it's a team of the family, and it's a team within the business, and the advisors around in some cases that you need to build as well. Next slide, please. You do not have to digest this whole slide, but if you're going to start bringing people into profit sharing and equity sharing employees, there are so many ways. They all have various levels of alignment with the outcomes that you want from this. Is it retention focused? Do you want to share the rewards of the company, etc.? There are all kinds of things to consider. Companies have become very valuable, which, given the housing prices and the cost of living now, is making really difficult for individuals to buy into companies. And so we are finding ways where we are enabling that by structuring it in a way that everybody's able to win from it.
And so if you were going to, if you are considering a sale to a third party in any way, and you know, one of the clients that I was working with this morning is considering a partial sale to, it's a strategic buyer who can expand their offering, and so, you know, now they're having the conversation around, is this enough to sell a proportion of is our company valuable enough at this point to sell 30%, 40%, 50%, whatever it is? And if so, if not, how can we improve the value of the company and get more cash flow to us and the other owners in the company? You could, you know, you can invest in the business to make the company stronger as an alternative. You can analyze all of your investments and look at your capital expenditures and with a view to sell the business. You can find out who the buyers might be and what they want to buy, and then build something that's going to fit with that. And I'll just go up a little off script here, because one of the things we often do, and I'm here in Edmonton, is as clients are considering their options, you know, we'll introduce them to our corporate finance team and say, you know, we want you to hear from somebody who's in the business, and corporate finance just buys and sells businesses on behalf of clients. And so we, you know, to a client, we'll say, we want you to just hear from somebody that sells businesses every day, all day, what buyers are looking for and what a process might look like. And maybe you're not even interested in selling, but wouldn't it be great to know what that looks like, just in case that's one of your options down the road? That is part of the intentionality. It's part of thinking through the options and gathering information so that you understand thoroughly what each option can mean to you.
Then can I just interject there? A while ago, I
know I won't be able to stop you, Eben, so you
that's
just
true.
go right ahead.
A while ago, I had a meeting with a client, and I had to be quite direct and forceful to push to really get the point across. I asked, how much is your business worth? This is just after the individual told me that it's a man. He said he is the only one that knows what happens in the business. He's Superman. He knows it all. He can do it all. Nobody really does it as good as he does. And the team just has to follow his orders. But he wants to sell his business. And I said, okay, how much is the business worth if you're no longer there? And he had a number in mind. I said, no, I asked you, how much is the business worth with you no longer there? Well, it's this number. I said, no, it's not. You just told me you're Superman, and Superman has disappeared. What is this business worth? And then I started letting off. Who does this? Who in your world? Who does the estimating quoting? Who does the research and development on new products? Who has the key customer relationships? Who has the key supplier relationships? Who has the key relationships with the key employees that will make them stay? Who runs the financial matters of the company? And slowly but surely it dawned upon him. And I said, yeah, you need to build a team of heroes to work with Superman so that you can translate that value into something that can actually be sold, right? Unless you want to sell your company and go work for somebody else for the rest of your life, but that's probably not what you want to do when you're 65, 66 years old, right? So it's an important distinction to make, but it's important to start that conversation early because you don't know if the next hire is going to be the right hire for you. So then I'm just mindful of time. I think we just need to speed up a bit.
Okay. And so, you know, speaking to Eben's point about moving from superhero to from Superman to superhero, you know, this is really a key part of where you start, is building the right team, building critical people up to take over roles of the owner, of the key leadership group, increase people's big picture thinking, and basically replacing yourself over time.
Lynn, sorry, just if you can go back to the last point there.
Hurry up,
It's
Lynn,
about,
but I'll make points. You speed up, but I'll make points.
You replace yourself or your roles over time. This is an important understanding to have about the different roles that you play. If you're the founder, president, CEO, chief executive of everything, you're the final big decision maker. Something to keep in mind, or if you're working in a company where this is the case, have a really good understanding about the roles that everybody plays and who has what responsibilities. When I worked through with the family, they were and these guys were quite well prepared. They've got a family trust in place for 12 years already. So they've got another 10 years, 10 years to go before the family trust is unwound. And so they're in a pretty good spot. But when we start to work through the roles and who plays what roles, I asked the question, what are the vulnerabilities here? Because succession is also about unforeseen events hitting a company. And if you are the shareholders of a company, or you're working in a company, you should have the right to ask the shareholders, what happens to the company and everybody in here and their livelihoods if something should happen to somebody at the top? And I think that is an important distinction to make, to understand what the roles are. And that will take us to the next slide then, about the enterprise value.
Yeah, and I think that the one last point that I'll just make on that is we always have to remember that good succession planning is not only about the succession of ownership, like who ends up with shares, but it's also the succession of leadership. And both of those must be addressed in any good succession plan. It's not just about the tax planning, the legal planning, all of that. if you don't have the leadership succession taken care of as well as the ownership succession, it's an incomplete plan and one that's destined to not succeed.
So whether you want to keep the business, whether you want to transition it to children or family members, whether you want to transition it to employees, bring them in, whether it's partially or in full, whatever you want to do with the company going forward, if you start to think, I'm maximizing the value of the company, that's going to be done by doing a few things well, but ultimately it is about driving the goodwill of the company. Somebody that says, I can pay $2 million for the assets, but I'm actually in the company, I'm willing to pay $5 million because I'm going to pay $3 million for the goodwill. And why is somebody paying for the goodwill? It's because the company's got a reputation in the marketplace, it's got a good team in place, and it's got continuity in all the important things that it does. So ultimately, that will drive up the multiple by which you can sell your company, right? The more of that you have. If you've got one key customer or one channel through which you sell only, or 80% of your sales are to just one customer, I know it's unlikely in your industry, your risk factor for any buyer has just gone up significantly. Or if you are just in one market, if all of a sudden you're able to position yourself stronger in whichever market, you are positioning yourself for a better value in the end. So you do not have to do many things different, but you have to maybe just change the emphasis of where your focus is, where you are putting the effort into making the company run well. And I know it is really hard when all of us have got really big, really important calendars that is chock and block full of things that need to get done. And they are all saying, I need to get it done right now. So if you can just go to the next slides there, Lynn. Bottom line, we can help. We don't want to spend too much time on these slides, but we've got people, we've got thousands of team members across the country. We work across industries. We're able to meet you with where you are at in your business and evolution, help the existing generation, help future generations. And we've got all kinds of services that we can bring to the table that you may need. The next slide, please. We've got offices literally from coast to coast. Sometimes we spend our time all the way from Newfoundland in the morning to Victoria in the afternoon. We literally work with companies across the country. So if you're not in Edmonton or Abbotsford, we can still talk if that is what you want to do. Yeah, and so thank you for your attention. And we want to open it up if there are any questions.
Okay. I haven't seen anybody posting any questions, but that doesn't mean to say they don't have them. Does anybody have any questions? If you want to either raise your hand or just take yourself off mute. We'd welcome any questions at this point.
I have a question.
Gerald.
Yes, if your company is of a certain size versus a different size, let's say smaller versus medium versus larger, is there a different process that you go through, or is it relatively the same?
So Gerald, I'll take that question. It can be exactly the same. The moving parts of the process will be the same. Where you spend the time when you go through it will be different, right? We've got small companies with more and small family businesses, $2-3 million values that have got more complexity in place than $20 million companies in value. So it's not as easy as saying it's a small company or it's a large company. The complexity levels will be different and what needs to get done. The implications of decisions may be different. It depends very much on where the family is at. You know, if there are multiple generations in the family, if there are specific family dynamics that need to be dealt with. So in the end, right at the outset, you would be able to assess whether there are what the complexity level would be. And, you know, if there's something that anybody wants to discuss with us offline, our emails will be is included in the emails that will come from Sandra. And so we'd be happy to talk through what that would look like, because that's an important assessment early on. We don't want to bring the whole, you know, battle group of the army out when really we just have a small thing to accomplish over here.
Yeah, and Gerald, these are people conversations at the beginning. You know, they're conversations about what do you want, and who's involved, and what does everybody else want, and what are some of the issues. I mean, they're not numbers conversations at the beginning. They're about goals and plans and history and you know, dreams and all those kinds of things. So really, I totally agree with Eben that they're very similar, especially at the beginning stages. There may be more complexity depending on, you know, multiple markets, or, you know, multiple lines, multiple generations of families. That's kind of where it can get a little bit more complex depending on individual situations.
What does it cost to sell a business?
I think even you're smiling. Do we want to talk about this based on the BC model or the Alberta model, or we got Johan here in Ontario? They're all pretty similar. It's a percentage.
Yeah, it's really hard. Yeah.
It's usually a percentage of the value of the business. You know, usually it's somewhere, and jump in, you guys, if I'm off in your markets, but it's usually somewhere between 4 and 7%. And it really depends on, you know, how much work is required for smaller businesses. Sometimes things are done on an hourly basis, you know, depending on the needs, but it's going to be, typically it's a percentage of the value of the sell price.
The complexity comes into play, and the more complexity there is, you know, I would imagine that the cost would be slightly higher.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a client in this business that wanted to sell the business, and prior to selling the business, what they actually did is they hired me to go in to stage the business for sale. So what we did is we actually improved EBITDA so that they could get more, you know, that multiple for their business. So they ended up spending more than the amount that Lynn and Eben just shared, but they made that all back in multiples on the back end. So I think part of this is also, you know, it's understanding. It's kind of like real estate. Well, you know, you can sell your house, and there's real estate agents that'll do 1% or 2.5%, but then there's also other things that you can do, and your business is so much more complicated than your house to add value, right?
Sorry.
In your fee, you include all the lawyers or accounting, or?
That would be separate, Mario.
That's it, another fee.
Yeah,
okay.
That would be, and again, it depends on the level of complexity. If there is a high level of due diligence, preparation work that needs to be done. I've had a really, really small company, a subsidiary of a client that sold. The business was worth 600 to 800,000. They're still working through the earnings a year or two later. I can tell you that unfortunately, wasn't our decision. They paid more in legal fees than people that sold the business for $5 million. So there, right there is the cost. It's just incredible, you know. So you really need to plan this out, but you also have to plan when you want to go to market. And as Johan said, you know what? If you can build up the value, then the cost of selling the business is not really that big a part of the decision, because ultimately you will put far more into your own pockets.
And if I may, I know we're running out of time, but if I may, there is something magical that happens when you get over $1 million in EBITDA. And then in this industry, from what we've seen in selling businesses, there's something magical that happens when you get over 2 million in EBITDA. Because when you get over $2 million in profitability in EBITDA, and I'm using those words interchangeably and I shouldn't, you tend to attract private equity, and private equity generally, if they really want you, they'll offer you, more money. We've seen some pretty ridiculous multiples, and then we've also seen some really low multiples. So people just looking, maybe your competitors just looking, for a deal, right? So this is where if you get over that $1 million, I think is the first threshold, and then 2 million is the second threshold. Your multiples tend to grow. So maybe at $1 million, I'm just throwing out a number, you'll get 4 times multiple, but at $2 million, you may get 6, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the key message there, Johan, is preparation, because if you, if you're working toward those goals and those EBITDA numbers, then you can be working on that for a few years, and you can ultimately take a lot more and put it in your pocket than you would have on if you had not done the preparation. And I'll just say, tax is the other component of that. There's a lot of tax planning that can be done in advance that with 2 years, 5 years, 7 years time, that can't be done with 6 months, right? You'll take a lot more of your sell price home if you set the stage for the value of the business and set the stage for the tax planning as well.
I find it interesting that on this call, just looking at the group that's here, we've got some people who are getting ready to hand that business over, and then we've got others on here who are that next generation who have either moved in or in that process of moving in, and they're already working within the company. So I would imagine, but please correct me if I'm wrong, the conversation might be a bit different depending on who you're speaking to, because you've got kind of different perspectives, don't you? If you're a younger person, if I can say that, and you're coming in and you're taking that business over, your perspective on continuity might be different than the person who's handing it off. So do you find at MMP that do you have people who are just looking to hand the business off to you, that come to you, or do you find it's those generations that are actually taking over the business that are coming to you?
It's both, Sandra. It's a good question. It's both, and it's different decisions that need to be had. A family that says we're going to sell the business may generate a whole bunch of wealth. Well, that wealth needs to be managed, and maybe it needs to be managed beyond just the generation selling their shares. The incoming generation typically do not want to come up with really, really large checks of their own, because they're going to say, would love to buy my parents' business, just don't have the money. So now we need to find a way to do that. And then if we say, okay, you're going to come in, but the company actually needs to pay some retirement income to mom and dad so that they've got safety about their retirement, because at 67, they cannot recreate retirement equity from scratch and build a business up again if they lose everything. How do we put security in place? And that tax planning comes into it, etc. So it's a matter of, and I actually find much joy in when we've got multiple generations in the same conversations. Some is held separately, but when you can bring the generations and help with that transition between generations, the conversations that come of it, some of it is sometimes really uncomfortable, just to be honest, about stuff that comes out from families, but we deal with it. But you know what, in most cases, majority of cases, it is just you help with that smooth flow, because the days of taking the keys to the business and just say, here to the child, you take it over. You've seen me do this before. Now you drive the car. Those days are long gone. It's too complex. There are too many moving parts, and the dollar value is just too high.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. It was a great question, Sandra. In our process, we involve both of them right off the bat, both generations right off the bat. And one of the reasons that we do that is, we've been doing succession planning for a long time. I certainly have been, for more than a decade. And we've seen plans that have not worked. And one of the things that consistently is the case in a plan that doesn't work is that there's been no meeting of the minds at the beginning around where the business is going and everybody's roles and how this is going to all roll out. So, you get 2 or 3 years down the road in a succession plan. And to Eben's point, the 66-year-old founder says, hey, you know, I'm ready to take out my, I'm ready to be paid, you know, $250,000 a year for my value or whatever. I want you to buy 50% of the shares this year. So we need to, you know, we need to conserve cash, and I want to get my money out of this business. And the incoming generation says, well, I was thinking that we were going to invest $750,000 into new technology this year so that we can grow the business, because I'm looking at the next 10 years and I'm excited about all of the things that we can do with the business. And the founder is going, well, that's not what I was thinking at all. And so, you know, that if those conversations haven't been had in the early days, that's when things start to unravel. Right? There's this competition for cash and different views around where the business is going. I see Johan with your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, Mario, just following up to your question, in terms of what needs to be done. Everyone's very focused on, when in succession planning, everyone's very focused on having someone come in to help them sell the business, to help them do the deal. And there's lots of people that will help you do that deal in the marketplace. That happens to be one of the things that we do. But I've noticed that there's very few people that do what Lynn and Eben do, which is walk you through that personal side and help you do the planning. And I can tell you, you know, from a personal standpoint, I came from a business family, and you know, we got exactly what we wanted for our business. We sold it to our largest international competitor. It was in the advertising space. However, because that emotional and personal planning had not been done, you know, the family and the few family members they couldn't foresee the challenges they were going to hit emotionally, personally, and they regretted selling the business and regretted selling it in a certain way. And so some of that planning is not just to maximize value, well, that's very important, but part of it understand that individual.
We lost you for a second there, Johan.
And that's how you make sourdough bread.
Okay, sorry, I just have there's one thing here. Amrita has, I think Amrita is gone, but she says, great conversation. As third generation, this information was necessary and vital to continue our strategic planning. I look forward to this journey. Thank you for your time. All right. Well, that's great. And I do apologize. We have overrun. Thank you very much, Lynn and Eben. Very, very informative session. I hope this has provided some insights for you. Would welcome your feedback. We will be recording it. We will have the slide deck available, and you can reach out to Lynn or Eben or even Johan as well. Tony, did you want to say a few words before we finish this?
Just simply again, thank you to Lynn and Eben for the valuable information. It's always interesting. It's also nice to see how it tied into Johan's message of some of his previous presentations. So I like where this is going and how it relates to the owners within our industry and our manufacturers out there. Again, so hope it's helpful for them. So thanks.
Yeah, and actually you raise a good point. Just to mention to you all that Johan had done a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and we recorded that, and you may find it advantageous to watch that if you didn't attend, to watch what he presented there and then watch the recording for this again. And feel free to share the recordings with staff or other colleagues. You're welcome to do that, but we hope you found this very helpful, and we look forward to working with MMP again in the future. It's great that you have all these resources available, and we're really pleased that we've managed to connect. So on that note, I'll say thank you to everybody for your time today. Look forward to the next webinar. A reminder that the CKCA National Forum is in Moncton, New Brunswick, February 28th to the 30th. We have sold out at our last two events, so a reminder, please register early. And if you're not going to Moncton, then hopefully we'll see you in Toronto for the two trade shows in October or November. So until next time, we'll see you all. Take care and enjoy the rest of the summer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Goodbye.